On this episode, we're going to be talking about outperformance, what it looks like and how to punch above your weight. And who better to talk to than senior marketers from two firms who perennially rank among our top outperformers in our Global 100 study of the world's largest asset managers. So this week, we're going to be talking to James Sansevero and Ross Duncton, who are both CMOs respectively at Lord Abbett Co and BMO Global. And we'll be covering strategic decay, what it is, what it looks like, and how you can find ways to forge ahead of your competitors. We're going to talk about how you build internal teams that are actually able to get really big transformational things done. We're going to talk about what campaigns they've been most proud of in the last 12 months or so. We're also going to talk about the importance of culture and ESG to asset managers in the current landscape. And then lastly, we'll talk about building a brand that's actually resilient enough to handle the changes that we're likely to see in the asset management space over the next decade or so. Anyway, without any further ado, I very much hope you enjoy listening to this podcast as much as we did making it.
So, gentlemen, I think the reason that we want to have both of you on is very much because in the last two Global 100 studies that we've put together, both Lord Abbett and BMO Global have really performed really very well, not only compared to the rest of the 100 largest asset managers in the world, but also done a really phenomenal job of, as we would say, outperforming, i.e., really packing a punch that's kind of bigger than your size might indicate in terms of that sort of marketing communications piece. So I thought it'd be really good to have you guys on today to talk about how you can achieve outperformance, where are the areas where you can actually deliver a lot of value in a way that is manageable and achievable for firms that maybe don't have the sort of BlackRock type budgets. I thought, Jim, if I could go to you first, just to sort of get us into the conversation, how do you think about the best ways to create outsized results in terms of your marketing communications strategy?
Well, I think the first part there's probably three parts to it. The first part is really having a strategy, being very deliberate about what it is we're trying to achieve, what type of relationship we're trying to establish in the marketplace. And the second part is having the right kind of people. We're a smaller shop. So, I like to say that we're not an army like some of our competitors. When you hear about the numbers of people they have, and you look at our numbers, I like to think we're sort of like a special forces. So we have to be very selective about the type of people we have, following the strategy, being able to execute. And then finally, having the support internally. We have a great relationship with our sales team, very strong with our relationship management team, and the strength with our technology team, which adds to the whole aspect of the whole effort. So it's really, I think, those three important factors for us.
I think having a strategy and actually being able to be really focused thing is actually it's kind of counterintuitive. I've seen it with a few firms. Robeco is one of them, where having to have a more, having constraints in some ways forces you to be more focused, which can actually be really, really powerful. And I suspect that's something that rings true for you as well, Ross.
Yeah, I mean, those comments were pretty much the same ones that I would have for that question. I think it's about focus and clarity, and a clear vision, and having the focus and the clarity to do it, and having the support to say no to some stuff. And that's not being unhelpful. It's being disciplined around, actually, that's not what we want. No, you have to be pragmatic in certain situations and all those sorts of things, but making sure you've got that clarity and that focus, making sure that you've got the right, it's a mindset. I think you have to have people in smaller teams. You have to have people that could do the strategic piece and get the strategic, but also can get stuck in to actually deliver on some of them. So you have to have a really versatile team. Also going across different elements of the team, really versatile team, and certainly an ambitious mindset, and the ability and the being dogmatic enough to really stick at things and that sort of side of things. And the third thing that I would say is that the support that Jim mentioned a second ago at an exec level is really, really important. It's about scalability and automation and those sorts of things. And those are terms that are used a lot. But one of the things that we've been really disciplined around, because we've had to the point a second ago, is about getting frameworks in place. It's not about making sure everything is exactly the same, but making sure everything is integrated within a particular framework that then allows us to scale it and ultimately, hopefully, allows us to automate quite a bit of stuff. And with that, you can save a huge amount on resource whilst getting the amplification that you need in certain areas. So yeah, very similar themes, basically.
So that actually takes me quite nicely on something I wanted to get onto, which is this issue of, executive, senior leadership team buy-in. Without that, it's really, really difficult to get, frankly, anything much done, especially if you want to get something high impact or sometimes bold done. Without senior leadership support, it's going to be dead in the water. But I think, as marketing professionals, one of our challenges is how do we actually get that senior team buy-in for some of the things that we might want to do. So I don't know, Ross, if you have any sort of tactics or sort of strategies for getting that senior team buy-in for the things that you want to do.
I think so. There's probably a few really key ones from my perspective. I think marketing in general does itself a massive disservice a lot of the time. And what I mean by that is that actually, if you get it, if you're clear, I think within asset management, marketing is not necessarily valued as much as it should be, right? But actually, marketing is part of the problem. And the way that people value activity or whatever, not just asset management, but in numbers, really, that's the currency in a business to a large degree. So firstly, how do you quantify and translate the great marketing activity that businesses are doing and teams are doing into numbers that can be understood by those that don't necessarily share the same passion or the same knowledge of what marketing can do in the mid to long term in particular? And we've been really successful in terms of quantifying a lot of stuff. So the terminology that I use is that the currency in any business is numbers. How do we translate that into numbers? And there's so many different ways that you can do it, actually, when you put your mind to it. I think the other thing that sometimes marketers, just in general, let ourselves down on, and it's not just marketing, it's lots of parts of the business, but is when you say you're going to deliver something, deliver it, and deliver it well. And actually, it's surprising the level of trust and support that you can gain from being just doing what you say you're going to do. It sounds so simple. I know it's not easy, but managing expectations. So not going in and just a best endeavors. We're going to try to do this, and sometimes there's a case for that. But we're going to do this. But we need this. If we get this, we're going to deliver this. And you do. Every team, I'm sure, gets opportunities when something has to happen. There's a forced event of some sort. It might be an acquisition, a merger, or something else, where there's a deliverable that has to happen. Use that opportunity to deliver to a really standard. And once you've got a few of those under your belt, actually you'll have an exec team, I think, that really supports what you're doing in terms of they know that you can deliver. Then you might get the sort of window to be able to say, and this is the value that we've got. And then you can really start, but you've got to build it up over time. And I think all too often, marketing teams are seen as, let's just get marketing to do that. And it's almost you're directed what to do rather than directing what to do. And so, I think that's how you earn a lot of the sort of trust with other parts of the business.
I guess one of the critical things to actually getting stuff done and then earning that trust is something you both touched on in your sort of initial salvos, which is around this issue of high performance teams. How do you build a team that's actually, Jim, to use your terminology, a special forces team for getting stuff done rather than necessarily a whole platoon full of people. What are the first things you think about when you're actually, thinking about how to build those high performance teams? Jim, if I could go to you first on that.
Well, I want to just touch a little bit on what Ross said here. I agree. It's marketing's ability to build trust is so crucial because of the way it has been viewed in the asset management industry and in many industries. I mean, you read textbooks and they tell you how marketing is supposed to be positioned as a strategic asset, and very few firms really treat it as such. From our standpoint, again, go back to strategy. We have a very, deliberate strategic planning effort that starts at the top of the organization. And I sit there with those people. And once we've decided what our strategic effort is, marketing is asked, how are you going to participate? And when we decide how that's going to be, it then gets back to the people. And when we think of our people, we just finished, our fiscal year ended, and we just spent the last 2 weeks talking about every individual in the firm. And so it's a matter of not only what I want, but among our leadership, people know all the players, and we know their strengths and their weaknesses. And we always look to make sure we have the right people in place. We discuss, what it is we're doing strategically in that area, and then we say, is the person the right person to be executing? And we hold people accountable. And it's part, we're now establishing our new goals for the year, and everyone has to put their goals down on a piece of paper, and senior leadership is aware of them, and it's a group effort. So I echo this whole idea of trust, but you do need to get senior executive leadership involved in the process. And I've been lucky. We have a team that does do it that way. And I think we've seen the success from it.
The other thing, Josh, I would just add to Jim's point on the individuals and that sort of side of things is I think, so I totally agree with what you were just saying there. We, certainly across my team, we review everyone on a regular basis. So we're really reviewing how people are progressing and that sort of side of things. But also when you're recruiting, I think there's places where absolutely recruiting from within asset management is the right thing to do. And it's a really, in terms of subject matter expertise, that's a really key part of it. But there's also other areas where actually recruiting outside of asset management is a really useful thing to do. If you think about something like digital, well, the digital competency, I think a number of people will probably agree that actually digital development within asset management is behind a number of other industries, not all, but a number of industries for sure. So actually, what do you need in that role? Somebody who really gets digital or gets CRM. Do they need to understand the product? Well, they need to have a working knowledge, but somebody who's good at what they do will get a working knowledge pretty quickly. But we've got a whole building full of people that understand investments. And actually, it's the competency that we need. Other roles, of course, in order to get credibility internally and to be able to do their job to a really good degree, they do need the industry background. But it's getting that blend of the experiences that I think is really, really important overall.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. You need some outside views occasionally. We sometimes look so much at ourselves, we don't even see ourselves, right? And it's important.
All industries are inward looking to a degree, and asset management is no different in that respect, I think.
Would you say that digital is the area where there is the most to learn and pull in from perhaps other industries?
I would say it depends what you quantify as digital. I would say digital, CRM, content's an interesting one actually, because you do need subject matter expertise and you need to understand the products. But I know a number of firms have had journalists that have come in and things like that. So I think there's an argument for and against. It's probably a blend there. But digital, CRM, design, those sorts of things, if it's end consumer focused as a business, actually the end consumer doesn't have a great understanding of asset management. So it's not a terrible thing if the individuals don't as an acid test. If they don't understand it, they should put it into different language. So I think I wouldn't say digital is the only one. I think there's especially with data, client data and segmentation and all those sorts of basic principles, or rather basic principles in a lot of other worlds, I think they're now really coming to the fore in asset management, and they're not being utilized that much at the moment.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's not the end all, but it's a very important part, because that's the part we lagged the most in being able to execute. I mean, I remember, and I've been beating the bushes for years. I still haven't achieved it, but I've been telling people our experience should be like the Amazon experience when you go onto a website. Like, that's what people experience in their daily lives when they're not in the asset management industry or making choices. They should be experiencing that same kind of experience with us. And that's sort of like the objective and goal. And so it is some of our digital competitors out there and that expertise that we need to incorporate here to get where we should be as an industry.
I think there's quite an interesting point here, which is that I think historically it's always been quite easy to stand out as an asset manager if you've got a really slick, thoughtfully put together set of social channels, for example, and your digital content. I think we're seeing strategic decay in the sense that it's less and less easy to actually, people are not going to go, wow, you've got an Instagram, because we're actually seeing fund admin businesses, for example, traditionally very, very conservative now, with thousands of Instagram followers using it for their sort of culture and purpose type content. And I think from what we're seeing, I think it's harder and harder to find novel ways of actually standing out in terms of what you're doing, if that makes sense. There's this notion of strategic decay, and I wondered where you thought the sort of biggest areas for sort of marginal gains were. You know, when you look across the entire suite of things that you could be doing, where do you think you can have the most impact? Ross, if I can jump to you.
This is going to sound very simplistic, but it's really difficult. I think authenticity, actually. So whatever it is you stand for, be really authentic about it and show your authenticity, your depth, your breadth, all of those sorts of things. Because if you go back, I don't think you're going to find any asset management firm, any financial services firm, any firm, frankly, that's going to say they're not client focused. But so many say we're client focused. It's like, well, actually, how do you, I'm not saying they're not, but how do you differentiate on that? You have to be exceptional at every step of the way. And I don't think that there's a huge amount that really could really hang their hat on that in a different way to anyone else. I mean, we're very much, you know, our current we did a piece of work a couple of years ago in terms of what's our investment proposition, and it's very much centered around responsible investing. Not everyone, we're exaggerating. Lots of people are talking about ESG and responsible investment, certainly in Europe, Jim, perhaps not in the States or whatever, but in Europe. And actually the challenge or what we've really tried to focus is on bringing that authenticity to life. Because actually there's not that many that are authentic, and we've got a fantastic story to tell. So that's our differentiator. It's not it's not the territory or the area that we're in. It's the depth and breadth of the proposition that we can articulate in that particular area. And I think no matter where you're sort of differentiating yourself or looking for marginal gains and those, you know, that for me has got to be one of the key factors.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting one. I agree, because you know, whether we're talking about authenticity or we're talking about positioning, the reality is you can probably list on, you know, your 10 fingers the number of asset managers that most people have an instant, yeah, I know what their thing is. You know, you look around 90% of the 100 largest asset managers in the world, and it's not entirely clear what their thing is. You know, in a nutshell, you're not even sure what their story is, what they're looking to get done over the next 5 years. It's probably the same thing everyone else is. It's got something to do with, you know, growing assets, but beyond that, it's really difficult to differentiate. Jim, I mean, in terms of, do you think that's the biggest area of sort of marginal gain, or is it that and something else?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, look, we're moving into a world where ESG and responsible investing, whatever you impact investing, whatever you want to call the different components. And again, Ross is correct. I mean, Europeans are definitely setting the standard here, but it's quickly taking hold here in the States. And we feel the same way. It's we talk about global corporate citizenship and the need to be an authentic citizen. And quite frankly, you know, we're slowly building towards it because of the authenticity or authentic aspect of it, because we want to be careful. You know, you look at some of them, the players, the larger players, they're in the news a little too much, seem to be a little bit over their skis, and suddenly they're the target of protests or different things in the press and questioning whether they're greenwashing. And, you know, that's something you try to avoid. And so I think it's a very deliberate step. And I think that people will be, they're asking those questions. Those are the questions they're asking before they even talk to you about performance these days. And they want to know, what's your culture? What do you believe as an organization? How do you act as an organization, as well as how does your investment practice mimic? It's so important for that to be a part of what we are. And so it's a challenge, how to make it alive, how to make it real, how to bring in different components of telling that story are critical areas that we're looking at and trying to figure out and make sure we're doing it and doing it right, and avoid being a headline somewhere in the trade press or somewhere around the world. So I think that's an important thing. I totally agree with what Ross has said.
I think ESG is probably the single biggest area where you see the least authenticity, really. And I think that's why we're seeing a really interesting phenomenon now where last year the conversation was about greenwashing. This year the conversation is about whistleblowers, because we had two separate big whistleblower events just in the last few weeks and months, really, with some of the biggest household name managers in the world. And you think, well, if they can get it that badly wrong, it's going to be pretty easy for any one of us to get it wrong. And I just wonder what for you guys is what's the sort of thought process behind making sure that you're not overstepping the bounds of authenticity when it comes to talking about ESG in particular? Jim?
Yeah, for us, it's just, again, being very deliberate in implementing the strategy. As we look at this, it's important that we don't say things and do things that we're not backing up. And the due diligence processes that are now taking place are definitely looking to poke holes. And every day you hear more and more groups, of whether it be the consultants or large pension funds that are asking the questions. They're coming in and asking. And so you better be true to it. And that means having everybody on board, having everybody talking the talk and walking the walk. And so, again, we're taking a very slower approach. Everybody's talking about how many assets you can gain in this space and things of that nature. That's great. But, we've always had a philosophy about how we work, and we want to have things that are, 10, 15 years from now, people should be proud that they did what they did with us, and they can look back and say they did exactly what they said they were going to do. So that's a hard thing to do. And I think that's why you saw the whistleblowers, people who are very committed to this and finding that it's not really the way it is. And so we've had a lot of discussion about it, and we're going to take deliberate steps to make sure that when we do say something, we can back it up.
Yeah, I think that's critical. I mean, is that the same approach you would have, Ross?
I think by and large it is. I mean, the only thing that I would sort of add to that is that so in order to, the project that I mentioned earlier in terms of that we did around our investment proposition, we didn't set out to say we do responsible investing. That came naturally out of the process that we followed. The process was very simple. It sounds a lot more simple than it was, by the way, but it was very simple in that basically it was understand actually what we do within the business. So we went around all the investment teams in detail, understanding what they did and all those sorts of things. And actually, the thing that really came out very strongly was responsible investing, and and there were some areas that were quite as strong. So it's not about that you can either reduce your messaging or you can bolster that particular area. It's that there's no so we were really careful and meticulous in terms of any messaging that we go out with. We understand very, very clearly the proposition that sits behind it. And if you can't, particularly in an area like this, you leave yourself way open. And I think there's a number of businesses, I suspect there's a number of businesses that are leaving themselves too open. They don't necessarily know what's going on in the weeds in terms of some of the in some of the sort of areas, or it's just not as clear. And because the market's so competitive on it at the moment, you want to dial up that message. So it's about having that discipline around you've got to be authentic. It comes back to what I was saying earlier. And one of the key factors I think that ensures or helps to ensure that you are being authentic is the culture of a business, and generally having that buy-in for we call it, BMO has a purpose of boldly growing the good. That's the purpose across the whole business. People internally feel exceptionally passionate about that, exceptionally passionate about it. And that's really helped us in the global asset management business, in terms, because obviously responsible investment ladders directly into that. Great. But I think the authenticity and the cultural support is really.
I think you're absolutely right, and that sort of touches on the point that Jim was making earlier about the sorts of questions that consultants are asking now. And we're seeing more and more that our clients are getting some really quite searching questions about their culture from consultants who want to know exactly what's going on in the hood. What's it like to work there? Do you have key person risks? Is it all built around one person, or is there sort of a toxic culture sat behind something that's going to implode at some point? I think that's a really interesting sort of new-ish development that we've seen over the last couple of years. I think one question I had for both of you really was, how do you start thinking about that process of defining your culture, and then actually what's the most effective way of communicating?
Well, we feel pretty strong as a 90-plus-year-old private partnership The partnership over the last couple of years has really come together very strongly. And, we reviewed over the last 3 years, what is our vision as a firm, our mission as a firm, the values of the firm. And quite frankly, it's funny, but the pandemic in many ways accelerated that because of the need to sort of, go to remote work and the need for us to communicate more. And I think that really forced us to accelerate the communication and pulling the firm together and really unifying the firm under a banner. I mean, we're not that large. We're only 750 people, privately held, with a common goal and a vision. And, we've been pushing that story, and it really is, a lot of work internally. But it has led to some of the highest engagement scores when we do surveys and such. And once you've got your team engaged, then it's pretty easy for the marketplace to see what that engagement's about. It helps in recruiting, it helps in telling these stories, and people are excited about being here and doing the right thing. And, we have values of transparency and collaboration that are so critical to what makes the culture here strong. So yes, culture, it's funny when Ross was talking, I was saying it's culture underneath that simple thing of authentic behavior. It's because you got a culture behind it, and whistleblowers tell you that cultures aren't good, quite frankly. And you just hope that you're doing the right thing and you can avoid those kind of situations.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely huge, and I think it's interesting because really you're sort of trying to, with culture, you're trying to get at the one thing that actually underpins who and what you are. And I think the interesting point you made there, Jim, was around the fact that the sort of ownership structure actually, even the way that the business is organized is a really interesting point of difference, and actually leads to a whole swathe of other interesting benefits downstream of that for internal and external stakeholders. And then Ross, you were talking about how the responsible investment piece was core to the way that teams internally actually think about what they do, something that came out time and time again. Was there anything else that came out of your culture work, Ross? And also, how are you thinking about telling those stories externally?
I think, so BMO Global Asset Management is part of a much bigger group, Canadian BMO Financial Group. I would say one of the massive strengths of BMO overall is the culture and the seriousness that it takes when it comes to culture. And it's got a huge amount of work has been done over the years that obviously from a global asset management perspective we really benefit from on a large scale. I think the one key thing that I would say on culture is it's got to be taken seriously. So if something happens, or if people are behaving in a way or something that isn't in line with the culture, it's not acceptable. People have got to be able to be called out on it and those sorts of things. And that comes back to the authenticity piece, I think, in that respect. In terms of communicating the culture, I don't think. In some ways, I think that there's a role where there's a formal communication of the culture, but actually, it's kind of the less formal stuff that's the more important. It's how people are behaving. It's leading from the top. The actions that the business takes clearly reiterate the culture or the position. The belief that the business has. Those can be so strong. And when individuals in a business, certainly in my experience, start to really see that, its actions speak louder than words. And it's when people start to see the actions, that's when you can get some real passion behind it. And I think it, like I said, I'm like a broken record on this authenticity points, but that it's authentic. It's not just words. It's doing. It's walking the walk, and those sorts of things. I think that is the biggest factor in this.
What would you say the role of the senior leadership team is in that?
It's leading, but it's making sure that it's high. It's got to be high on the agenda and high priority. The reason I pause there is I'm thinking most companies surely have that high on their agenda these days. But it's got to be high on the agenda. So absolutely, it is within our business, and it's very clear that it is as well. And it's clear that it is because the actions and the sort of the things that we do with it, they ring true to the cultural beliefs that the business have. And I feel exceptionally proud to work for a business that really does that. So, but I'm sure lots of other businesses do as well. But certainly from my experience, it's really genuine, really genuine.
Yeah, I was just going to add to that, again, we like to talk about leading from the front, senior leadership right down. And, the partnership meets every week. We talk about leadership on an ongoing basis. Our people leaders in the firm, people look up to us. And if we're not walking the walk and talk, they're not going to do it. So it's critical that the top be totally engaged on the same page and leading from the front for our people.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think that's especially important when we think about the fact that our thesis is that really the asset management industry is going into a decade that's not going to look like the last decade. And we've been saying that for a couple of years, well before the sort of COVID phenomenon, raised all sorts of interesting questions. What things do you think asset managers should be doing in terms of building the resilience of their brands for a decade that's probably going to be more, even more competitive? There's going to be a lot of different developments, probably a lot of M&A, things like that. How should brands be positioning themselves for resilience in what could be quite a turbulent decade? Jim?
Again, I just think we've got the blocks in place here, what we've talked about. I mean, the whole trends are already in place. Yes, there's going to be a lot of consolidation and shifts because people are starting to see, how difficult it is to operate in an environment where costs are going up from all kinds of compliance issues, regulatory issues, wherever you want to go into the cost of doing business, and then of course performing in this environment. But it's building a solid culture that understands what its mission and vision, understanding that we have a strategy. We've laid out a 5-year strategic plan. We've refreshed it twice in the last 2 years, constantly looking and being very deliberate about how we try to grow. We don't have to be the fastest grower. We just have to be very good and offer a quality product that's authentic in what it does, delivered by a culture that believes in what it believes in. And I think, that's what drove us for 90 plus years. And we like to say we're a 90-year startup, continuing down the same path and doing what got us here and just doing it better. We look forward and understanding that, as a partnership, we leave this thing to the next generation and we have to leave it stronger than when we got it. So that's the way we think about it. And it's a very deliberate, strategic and focused approach.
I think after 90 years, Jim, it might be fair to say you've reached the scale-up stage rather than the startup phase.
Well, we like to think of ourselves. I mean, we were a little late to the party, but we've managed to be here and we're growing and feel good about it. So,
and Ross, when you're thinking about resilience for the brand, what are sort of key building blocks of that from your vantage point?
I think it's, we've already spoken about the culture and authenticity and those sorts of things, but I think it's also, you've got to, in terms of the, what does the brand stand for? It's got to be something that has longevity over the mid to long term, not the short term. You could go out this year and say the brand stands for X, but actually that's got a very short shelf life. That's not brand. That's just tactical campaigns type thing. And if it is, it's not for the mid to long term. And I think, to the 90 years that Jim was talking about, we've been around a long time, and it's because the people before us were able to think more long term about the business in terms of of course there's short term requirements and needs. Of course, any business has that, but it's balancing those with the longer term perspective from a brand perspective. What should the business stand for going forward, and how do we support that and those sorts of things, rather than just what do we need to do next week in terms of generating leads or deepening engagement and those sorts of things. That's more tactical. What's the strategic part of it? And I think that takes time, and fundamentally it's got to be aligned with what the senior management team, so the strategy ultimately. If it's not, you can have a marketing team that's disjointed, goes off and says we want to do X, Y, and Z, and it might tick a lot of the boxes, but if it's not aligned to the strategy, it's got a bit of a fundamental problem there. So it's got to be absolutely aligned to the strategic direction of the business over the mid to long term, and it's got to have that longevity built into it, basically. And I think if you have the right people behind it, in the looking over a couple of 100 years of business or whatever, over the short to mid term, that are passionate, genuinely believe and understand what the business is about, then I think typically you're going to get people who care about the business a lot and will look to do the right thing by it over that period of time as well. To Jim's point, to then hand it on to the next generation or next people in those particular positions. But yeah, I think that's really key.
I think that notion of having a long-term view is going to be absolutely essential to making sure that the next decade is weathered in a healthy way. I think we're going to see a lot of asset managers who don't necessarily get that equation right. But I have heavy confidence that for you both, that's going to be it's going to be a challenge that's easily weathered based on everything we've seen in the past. Now, look, I think that's kind of covered everything I wanted to get to today's conversation. That was really really helpful, very interesting. So really, all that remains for me to do is just thank you both for joining me for this conversation. I'm sure the listeners will very much find it helpful as well.
Well, I thank you. What I love about it is, at the end of the day, Ross and I were both pretty much saying the same things from two different sides of the pond today, and I think that's what's interesting and what's always good about these kind of situations when you talk with your competitors out there in the marketplace. We're all trying to do the same things in many ways, and that's what makes it great and fresh. So thank you for having us.